Bar kicks out man in Harris hat, then finds out he's the new boss. How will his boss respond? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The door to the bar swung open, letting in a gust of cool evening air. Ethan Harris stepped inside, the chatter and clinking of glasses momentarily pausing as the patrons turned to see who had entered. The room smelled of stale beer and fried food, a far cry from the polished exterior the bar had worked so hard to present to the upscale clientele it aimed to attract. Ethan adjusted his hat, emblazoned with his family name, Harris, in bold letters, and walked to the counter. The bar had been a fixture in the community for decades, though it had undergone significant renovations in recent years to cater to a more affluent crowd. To most people here, Ethan looked like a mismatch for the setting. A man in his late 30s wearing a patriotic shirt and hat that screamed small-town Americana. Behind the counter, Joe, the bartender, raised an eyebrow. He was a burly man with a perpetual scowl that seemed more suited to bouncing unruly patrons than mixing cocktails. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing tattooed forearms, and his expression made it clear that he wasn't thrilled with Ethan's presence. "Can I help you?" Joe asked, his tone more condescending than welcoming. "Yeah," Ethan said, unfazed by the icy reception. "I'll take a beer. Whatever you've got on draft." Joe glanced at Ethan's hat and then at his shirt, the stars and stripes catching the dim light. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You sure you're in the right place? This isn't some roadside dive." Ethan met his gaze, his face calm but firm. "I'm sure," he said. "Now about that beer?" Joe let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You've got some nerve walking in here looking like that," he said, leaning on the counter. "We've got a certain kind of crowd here, and I don't think you're it." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even. "I wasn't aware there was a dress code." "It's not about the dress code," Joe said, his smirk widening. "It's about the vibe. And you, my friend, don't fit it." The exchange had drawn the attention of nearby patrons, some of whom whispered and chuckled among themselves. Ethan could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their judgment heavy in the air. He had expected some level of scrutiny when he decided to visit the bar, but the outright hostility caught him off guard. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Just a beer, that's all." Joe straightened, his expression hardening. "I think you'd be better off drinking somewhere else," he said. "This place isn't for people like you." Ethan's patience, already thin, began to fray. "People like me?" he repeated, his tone challenging. Joe didn't answer, but the meaning was clear. The bartender's disdain wasn't just about Ethan's clothes, it was about what they represented. To Joe, Ethan was an outsider, someone who didn't belong in the world he had carefully cultivated within these walls. Before Ethan could respond, a large hand clamped down on his shoulder. He turned to see the bouncer, a tall, broad man with a no-nonsense demeanor. "You heard him," the bouncer said. "Time to go." Ethan sighed, his jaw tightening as he weighed his options. He could push back, demand the drink he had every right to order, but he knew it wouldn't accomplish anything. Not tonight, at least. "Fine," he said, stepping back. "I'll leave." The patrons laughed and jeered as Ethan walked toward the door, the sound following him out into the cool night air. He paused on the sidewalk, looking back at the bar. The neon sign above the entrance glowed brightly, a beacon for those deemed worthy of its hospitality. Ethan adjusted his hat and turned away, a determined set to his jaw. They didn't know who he was, not yet. But they would. Ethan's footsteps echoed on the quiet street as he made his way back to his car. He sat behind the wheel for a moment, the events of the evening replaying in his mind. The hostility, the mockery, the outright dismissal. It was infuriating, yes, but it also confirmed what he had suspected. The bar, once a cornerstone of the community, had lost its way. It had been 2 weeks since Ethan had learned about his uncle's passing. James Harris had been a larger-than-life figure, a self-made entrepreneur who had built a small empire of businesses, including the bar. Ethan had always admired his uncle, even if their relationship had been distant in recent years. James had been a firm believer in hard work and humility, values that Ethan had tried to embody in his own life. The news of the inheritance had come as a shock. Ethan had never expected to be named as one of his uncle's successors, let alone to have a stake in such a significant piece of his legacy. But with the inheritance came responsibility, and Ethan was determined to honor his uncle's memory by ensuring the businesses thrived. That's what had brought him to the bar tonight. He wanted to see it for himself, to get a sense of the people who ran it and the culture they had created. What he had found was disappointing, to say the least. "They've lost the heart of the place," Ethan murmured to himself, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel. "But I can fix it." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Ethan," said William, his uncle's longtime lawyer and confidant. "How did it go?" Ethan let out a dry laugh. "Let's just say they weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat." William chuckled. "I take it they don't know who you are yet?" "Not a clue," Ethan said. "Which is probably for the best. I wanted to see how they treated a regular customer, and now I know." And they failed," Ethan said bluntly. "The bartender refused to serve me and the bouncer threw me out. The whole place feels toxic. It's nothing like what my uncle built." William sighed. "I was afraid of that. James always said the bar was more than a business. It was a place for the community. Sounds like they've lost sight of that." "They have," Ethan agreed. "But I'm going to change that." "What's your plan?" William asked. Ethan's gaze drifted back to the glowing neon sign. "First, I'm going to introduce myself," he said. "And then, I'm going to remind them what this place is supposed to be." The following evening, Ethan returned to the bar, but this time he wasn't alone. William accompanied him, carrying a leather briefcase that held the documents formalizing Ethan's ownership. They stepped inside, the buzz of conversation fading as the patrons and staff noticed their arrival. Joe was behind the counter again, his expression shifting to one of annoyance as he recognized Ethan. "You again?" he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Didn't you get the message last night?" "I got it," Ethan said calmly. "But I think you're the one who's about to get a message." Joe's smirk faltered as William stepped forward, placing the briefcase on the counter and opening it with a practiced motion. He pulled out a stack of papers and handed them to Joe. "What's this?" Joe asked, frowning as he scanned the documents. "That," William said, "is proof that Mr. Harris here is the new owner of this establishment." The color drained from Joe's face. He looked up at Ethan, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You're joking," he said weakly. Ethan crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "Do I look like I'm joking?" The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over everyone present. Ethan let the moment hang, giving the staff and patrons time to process what had just happened. "Now," he said, his voice firm but calm, "let's talk about how things are going to change." Joe stared at the documents in disbelief, his hands trembling as he tried to process what he was seeing. The air in the bar was thick with tension, the chatter of patrons having died down to an uneasy silence. The words "new owner" echoed in Joe's mind, a realization that hit him like a punch to the gut. Joe stammered, his bravado gone. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," William interjected, his tone sharp. "These documents are signed, notarized, and legally binding. Ethan Harris is the rightful owner of this establishment." The mention of Ethan's last name sent a ripple through the room. A few of the patrons exchanged glances, the realization dawning on them. Harris. The same name emblazoned on the bar's original signage before its recent rebranding. The name of the man who had built this place from the ground up. Joe looked at Ethan, his expression shifting from disbelief to panic. "Look, I didn't know who you were," he said, his voice shaky. "If I had known, I never would have." Ethan held up a hand, cutting him off. "That's exactly the problem," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." Joe opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Ethan turned his attention to the rest of the staff, his gaze sweeping over the bartenders, waitstaff, and the bouncer who had thrown him out the night before. "I came here last night as a customer," Ethan said, addressing the room. "I wanted to see how this place was being run, how the staff interacted with the people who walked through those doors. What I saw was disappointing, to say the least." The staff exchanged uneasy glances, some looking down at the floor, others shifting uncomfortably. Lucy, a waitress who had been quietly observing from the corner, bit her lip, her nervousness evident. "This bar was built to be a place for the community," Ethan continued. "A place where anyone could walk in, feel welcome, and enjoy themselves. But somewhere along the way that vision was lost. And now it's my job to bring it back." The bouncer, a burly man named Rick, cleared his throat. "Look, Mr. Harris, I was just following orders last night," he said, his voice gruff but apologetic. "Joe told me to remove you, so I did." Ethan nodded, his expression neutral. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "But from now on, I expect you to use your judgment. If someone's causing trouble, by all means step in. But if someone's just here to enjoy a drink, they're not your enemy." Rick nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Understood." Ethan turned his attention back to Joe, who was still clutching the documents. "As for you," Ethan said, his tone firm. I'm not here to humiliate you or make a scene. But I need to know if you're willing to change. Joe swallowed hard, the weight of the question pressing down on him. I'll do better, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I promise? Ethan studied him for a moment before nodding. Good. Because if I see any more behavior like I did last night, you'll be out the door. Understood? Joe nodded quickly, his face pale. Understood. As the night went on, Ethan took the time to speak with each staff member individually. He wanted to get a sense of their personalities, their values, and their willingness to adapt to the new direction he planned to take the bar. Lucy, the waitress, was the first to approach him. She was in her mid-20s, with a kind smile and a nervous energy that made her seem younger than she was. Mr. Harris, she began, her voice hesitant. I just wanted to say, I'm really glad you're here. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Oh? And why's that? Lucy glanced around, making sure no one else was within earshot. Because the way things have been run around here, it's not right, she said quietly. Joe and Sam, they've been running this place like it's their private club. They only cater to people they like, and anyone else gets treated like dirt. Ethan nodded, his suspicions confirmed. And you? He asked. How do you feel about the way things have been? Lucy hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. I hate it, she admitted. But I didn't feel like I could say anything. I mean, I'm just a waitress. Who's going to listen to me? I'm listening, Ethan said, his tone gentle but firm. And I want you to know that your voice matters. If you see something that isn't right, speak up. I'll back you. Lucy's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and relief washing over her. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smiled. You're welcome. And call me Ethan. Over the next few days, Ethan threw himself into the task of transforming the bar. He held staff meetings to outline his vision, emphasizing the importance of creating an inclusive and welcoming environment. He implemented new policies, including mandatory training sessions on customer service and diversity. Some staff members, like Lucy and Rick, embraced the changes wholeheartedly. Others, like Joe and Sam, were less enthusiastic. Sam, the manager, frequently pushed back against Ethan's ideas, arguing that catering to a broader crowd would hurt the bar's image. This place is supposed to be exclusive, Sam said during one heated discussion. That's what keeps the high-paying customers coming back. If we let just anyone in, we're going to lose them. Ethan shook his head, his patience wearing thin. Exclusive doesn't mean discriminatory, he said firmly. If we treat people with respect, they'll come back. And if they don't, then maybe they're not the kind of customers we want. Sam scowled but didn't argue further. Ethan knew it would take time to win him over, if that was even possible. Word of the changes spread quickly, drawing mixed reactions from the bar's patrons. Some welcomed the new direction, excited to see the bar return to its roots as a community hub. Others, particularly those who had benefited from the old regime's exclusivity, were less thrilled. Ethan made a point of being present at the bar every night, engaging with customers and getting to know the community. He wanted people to see that he wasn't just an absentee owner, he was invested in making this place better. One evening, as he stood behind the bar helping Lucy with orders, a man approached him. He was older, with a weathered face and kind eyes that sparkled with curiosity. You're Harris, right? The man asked. That's me, Ethan said, extending a hand. And you are? Tom, the man said, shaking his hand. I used to come here all the time back when your uncle ran the place. It was a real gem back then. Feels like it's heading back in that direction. Thanks, Tom, Ethan said, a warm smile spreading across his face. That means a lot. Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. Your uncle would be proud of what you're doing here. He always said this place was about more than just drinks. It was about bringing people together. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, he said. Thanks for saying that. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. Some nights were busier than others, and not every customer was receptive to the changes. But slowly the bar began to find its footing. The staff, inspired by Ethan's leadership, started working together as a team. The atmosphere shifted, becoming warmer and more inviting. Ethan knew there was still work to be done, but for the first time he felt like the bar was on the right track. And as he looked around at the bustling crowd one evening, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This wasn't just a bar. It was a place where people could come together, share a drink, and feel like they belonged. And for Ethan, that was worth everything. The bar was slowly becoming a reflection of Ethan's vision, a place where people of all walks of life could feel welcome. The changes weren't instant, and not every day was easy, but progress was undeniable. Patrons who had once felt alienated by the previous management were returning, and new faces were joining the fold. The laughter and hum of conversation now filled the space, making it feel alive again. But for every success there were lingering challenges. Joe and Sam, though outwardly compliant, still resisted Ethan's leadership in more subtle ways. Ethan noticed how Sam's attitude toward patrons he deemed unworthy hadn't entirely disappeared. There were moments when Sam's disdain showed through, a sneer here, a dismissive comment there. Ethan knew he had to address the situation. He couldn't afford to let these lingering attitudes undermine the progress they'd made. One evening, Ethan called a staff meeting after closing. The team gathered in the bar, the chatter and clinking glasses replaced by an air of anticipation. Ethan stood at the front, his presence commanding yet approachable. "I want to start by saying how proud I am of the progress we've made," Ethan began. "This bar is starting to feel like the place my uncle envisioned, a place where everyone feels welcome. That's because of all of you, and I appreciate your hard work." A ripple of appreciation passed through the staff, though Sam crossed his arms, his expression guarded. "But," Ethan continued, his tone shifting slightly, "there are still areas where we need to improve. This bar can't just look inclusive, it has to be inclusive. That means treating every customer with respect, no matter who they are or what they look like." His gaze swept over the room, landing briefly on Sam. "If anyone has a problem with that, now's the time to speak up." The room was silent. Sam's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Joe shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Ethan's eyes. "Good," Ethan said. "Because this isn't negotiable. The way we treat people defines this bar, and I won't tolerate anything less than respect for everyone who walks through those doors." Lucy nodded, her expression determined. Rick, the bouncer, crossed his arms and grunted his agreement. Even some of the newer hires, inspired by Ethan's leadership, looked resolute. Ethan let the silence hang for a moment before softening his tone. "I know change isn't easy," he said, "but I believe in this team. I believe we can make this bar something we're all proud of. Let's keep moving forward, together." The meeting ended and the staff began to disperse. Lucy approached Ethan, a smile on her face. "That was good," she said. "I think people needed to hear it." Ethan smiled back. "Thanks, Lucy. I just hope it sinks in." Over the next few weeks, Ethan kept a close eye on the bar's operations. He spent time behind the counter, observing how the staff interacted with customers. He noticed small improvements. Joe was more polite, Sam less overtly dismissive, but he also saw room for growth. One evening, as Ethan was cleaning glasses behind the bar, a familiar face walked in. It was Tom, the older man who had spoken to him a few weeks earlier. He approached the counter, his smile warm. "Ethan," Tom said, extending a hand. "Good to see you." "Good to see you too, Tom," Ethan replied, shaking his hand. "What can I get you?" "Just a beer," Tom said. "And maybe a few minutes of your time?" Ethan nodded, pouring Tom's drink and setting it in front of him. "What's on your mind?" Tom took a sip of his beer before speaking. "I've been coming here for years, back when your uncle ran the place and even after things changed. I've seen a lot of ups and downs, but I've got to say, you're doing a great job." "Thanks, Tom," Ethan said, his chest swelling with pride. "That means a lot." Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. "But there's one thing I wanted to mention. It's about Sam." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What about him?" "I've seen how he talks to some of the customers," Tom said. "Especially the ones he doesn't think belong here. He's more subtle about it now, but it's still there. And I thought you should know." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made his frustration bubble to the surface. "Thanks for telling me, Tom," he said. "I'll take care of it." Tom smiled. "I know you will. Your uncle would be proud of you." Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. He had tried to give Sam the benefit of the doubt, but it was clear that more direct action was needed. The following evening, Ethan called Sam into his office. The bar was bustling, the sound of laughter and conversation filtering through the door as they sat across from each other. "Sam," Ethan began, his tone calm but firm, "we need to talk." Sam shifted in his seat, his expression guarded. "What about?" Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I've been hearing things about how you treat certain customers. And I've seen it myself. You've been better lately, but not good enough." Sam scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "Look, I'm just trying to keep the bar's reputation intact. We don't want it turning into some free-for-all." "This isn't about reputation," Ethan said sharply. "It's about respect. You don't get to decide who belongs here and who doesn't. Everyone belongs here." Sam crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. And if I don't agree? Ethan's gaze hardened. Then you're free to leave. But if you stay, things are going to change. No more excuses, no more justifications. Either you're part of the solution, or you're part of the problem. The room was silent, the weight of Ethan's words hanging in the air. For a moment, Sam looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped and he nodded reluctantly. Fine, he said. I'll do better. Ethan studied him for a moment, searching for any hint of insincerity. I hope so, he said finally. Because if I see any more of the behavior I've been hearing about, you're out. No second chances. Sam nodded again, his expression grim. Understood. The weeks that followed were a turning point for the bar. Sam's attitude improved, albeit slowly, and the rest of the staff began to fully embrace the new culture Ethan was building. Lucy, in particular, thrived under Ethan's leadership. Her warmth and dedication made her a favorite among both the staff and the patrons, and Ethan began to see her as a key part of the bar's future. One evening, as the bar was winding down for the night, Ethan pulled Lucy aside. You've been doing an incredible job, he said. I'm really impressed. Lucy blushed, a shy smile spreading across her face. Thanks, Ethan. That means a lot. I've been thinking, Ethan continued. I need someone to help me run this place. Someone who shares my vision and can keep things on track when I'm not here. And I think you're the perfect person for the job. Lucy's eyes widened. You mean, you want me to be the manager? Assistant manager for now, Ethan said with a smile. But if things keep going the way they are, who knows? Lucy beamed, her excitement evident. I'd love to. Thank you, Ethan. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Ethan said, clapping her on the shoulder. Now let's get back to work. As the bar continued to flourish, Ethan felt a growing sense of pride. The space had transformed from a toxic, exclusive environment into a welcoming hub for the community. Customers returned night after night, drawn by the warmth and authenticity that now defined the bar. Ethan knew there was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was honoring his uncle's legacy. And as he stood behind the bar, watching the laughter and camaraderie that filled the room, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the weeks went by, the bar's transformation became the talk of the town. The changes were palpable, not just in the decor or the policies but in the very atmosphere. Where there had once been tension and exclusivity, there was now warmth and camaraderie. Customers who had long avoided the bar were coming back, curious about the new management and eager to see the changes for themselves. Ethan continued to work tirelessly, splitting his time between running the bar and overseeing the other businesses he had inherited. But no matter how busy his schedule became, he made it a point to be present at the bar as much as possible. He wanted to lead by example, showing the staff that he was just as invested in the bar's success as they were. One Friday evening, the bar was packed. The hum of conversation and laughter filled the air, the clinking of glasses adding a rhythm to the lively energy of the room. Ethan stood behind the bar, helping Lucy and the other bartenders keep up with the steady stream of orders. As he poured a pint of beer for a regular customer, he caught sight of a familiar face walking through the door. It was Joe, the former bartender who had quit in frustration shortly after Ethan took over. He looked hesitant, his eyes scanning the room before finally landing on Ethan. Ethan raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything as Joe approached the bar. The other staff members noticed him too, their chatter quieting as they exchanged uncertain glances. Ethan, Joe said, his voice subdued. Can we talk? Ethan nodded, gesturing for Joe to follow him to a quieter corner of the bar. Once they were away from the noise and bustle, Ethan crossed his arms and looked at Joe expectantly. What's on your mind? Ethan asked. Joe shifted uncomfortably, his hands fidgeting at his sides. I wanted to apologize, he said finally, for the way I treated you when you first came in, and for how I acted after you took over. I was out of line. Ethan studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his sincerity. Why now? He asked. Why are you coming back after all this time? Joe sighed, his shoulders slumping. Because I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about respect, about treating people right. And I realized you were right. I let my ego get in the way and I took out my frustrations on people who didn't deserve it. Ethan's expression softened slightly, though he kept his tone measured. And what do you want from me? I'd like another chance, Joe said. I know I messed up, but I want to prove that I can do better. That I've changed. Ethan was silent for a moment, weighing his options. He had made it clear from the beginning that he had no tolerance for the kind of behavior Joe had exhibited. But he also believed in giving people a chance to redeem themselves, if they were truly willing to change. Here's the deal, Ethan said finally. I'll give you a trial period. You'll work under Lucy and you'll follow her lead. If she tells me you're not pulling your weight or falling back into old habits, you're out. No second chances. Joe nodded quickly, relief washing over his face. Thank you, Ethan. I won't let you down. We'll see, Ethan said, his tone firm but not unkind. Now let's get you back to work. Joe's return was met with mixed reactions from the staff. Some were skeptical, unsure if he had really changed, while others were cautiously optimistic. Lucy, ever the optimist, decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. If Ethan believes he deserves another chance, then I'll support it, Lucy said during a staff meeting. But let's all keep an eye on things and make sure the bar stays the welcoming place it's become. Joe, for his part, seemed determined to prove himself. He threw himself into his work, going out of his way to be polite and helpful to both customers and co-workers. It wasn't always easy, old habits die hard, but he made a genuine effort to change. One evening, as the bar was winding down, Joe approached Lucy at the counter. Thanks for giving me a chance, he said, his voice quiet. I know I've got a lot to prove, but I appreciate you not holding the past against me. Lucy smiled. Everyone deserves a chance to change, she said. Just don't make me regret it. Joe chuckled, the tension between them easing. I won't, he promised. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to focus on the bigger picture. He had plans to expand the bar's offerings, adding live music nights and community events to draw in even more customers. He also began working on a loyalty program to reward regular patrons, a small gesture that he hoped would further strengthen the sense of community he was building. One Saturday night, the bar hosted its first live music event under Ethan's management. A local band performed on a small stage that had been set up in one corner of the room, their upbeat tunes energizing the crowd. The bar was packed, the energy electric as patrons clapped and danced along to the music. Ethan stood near the back of the room, watching with a sense of satisfaction. This was what he had envisioned when he took over the bar, a place where people could come together, let loose, and enjoy themselves without fear of judgment. As the night went on, Ethan made his way through the crowd, chatting with customers and checking in with the staff. He noticed Lucy behind the bar, her smile radiant as she served drinks and joked with patrons. She had truly come into her own as assistant manager, and Ethan couldn't be prouder. Looks like the night's a success, a voice said from behind him. Ethan turned to see Tom, the older regular who had become a fixture at the bar. It sure does, Ethan said with a grin. Thanks for coming out, Tom. Wouldn't miss it, Tom said. You've done a hell of a job with this place, Ethan. Your uncle would be proud. Thanks, Tom, Ethan said, his chest swelling with pride. That means a lot. As the night drew to a close, Ethan gathered the staff for a brief meeting. The energy in the room was high, the success of the event giving everyone a boost. I just want to say how proud I am of all of you, Ethan said, his voice carrying over the chatter. Tonight was a big night and you all rose to the occasion. This bar is what it is because of you. The staff broke into applause, their camaraderie evident. Even Joe, who had been quiet for most of the night, looked genuinely pleased. As the applause died down, Ethan continued. This is just the beginning. We've come a long way, but there's still more to do. Let's keep building on this momentum and make this place the best it can be. The team nodded, their determination evident. Ethan felt a surge of gratitude as he looked around at the faces of the people who had helped him transform the bar. This wasn't just a business, it was a family. Later that night, as the last of the customers filed out and the staff finished cleaning up, Ethan sat at the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey. Lucy joined him, her expression tired but happy. Not a bad night, she said, sliding onto the stool next to him. Not bad at all, Ethan agreed. Thanks for everything, Lucy. I couldn't have done this without you. Lucy smiled, her cheeks flushing slightly. You've done plenty, Ethan. This place is a reflection of you. Ethan chuckled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Maybe. But it's also a reflection of everyone who works here. This bar is as much yours as it is mine. Lucy's smile widened, and the two of them sat in comfortable silence, the hum of the city outside the only sound. The bar, once a place of exclusion and division, had become something greater, a place of connection, belonging, and community. And for Ethan, that was the greatest success of all. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft glow over the quiet streets, when Ethan arrived at the bar the next morning. He stood outside for a moment, taking in the sight of the building. The neon sign above the entrance, now restored to its original design with his uncle's name proudly displayed, seemed to shine a little brighter in the early light. This was no longer just a bar, it was a testament to the legacy his uncle had left behind and the future Ethan was building. As he stepped inside, the stillness of the bar greeted him. The chairs were neatly stacked on tables, the floor freshly cleaned from the night before. Ethan walked to the counter, his footsteps echoing softly in the empty space. He took a moment to reflect on how far they'd come. The bar had been a challenge, a test of his patience, resilience, and ability to lead. But it had also been a lesson in the power of community and the importance of staying true to his values. He thought about the people who had become part of this journey. Lucy, who had grown into a leader in her own right, Joe, who was slowly but surely redeeming himself, and the countless customers who now saw the bar as a place where they belonged. The sound of the door opening pulled Ethan from his thoughts. He turned to see Lucy walking in, a cup of coffee in each hand and a warm smile on her face. "Morning, boss," she said, setting one of the cups on the counter in front of him. "Morning, Lucy," Ethan replied, taking a sip of the coffee. It was strong and just the way he liked it. "You're here early?" "I figured I'd get a head start on the inventory," she said, sliding behind the counter. "Plus, I wanted to talk to you about something." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's on your mind?" Lucy hesitated for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "It's about the staff," she said finally. "I think we've got a great team, but there's still some tension lingering from before you took over. I think we need to do something to bring everyone together." Ethan nodded, considering her words. "You're right," he said. "What do you have in mind?" "I was thinking we could organize a staff outing," Lucy said. "Something fun and casual, where everyone can relax and get to know each other outside of work." Ethan smiled. "I like that idea. Let's make it happen." Over the next week, Lucy took charge of organizing the outing with Ethan's full support. They decided on a picnic at a local park, complete with games, food, and plenty of opportunities for the staff to bond. The idea was met with enthusiasm from the team, even from those who were initially hesitant. The day of the picnic arrived, and the staff gathered at the park under a canopy of blue skies and sunshine. Ethan and Lucy had gone all out, setting up tables laden with food and drinks, as well as a few games to keep things lively. Joe showed up with a cooler of his homemade lemonade, a gesture that surprised everyone. "Figured I'd contribute," he said, his tone modest. The staff laughed and cheered as they played games, shared stories, and enjoyed the beautiful weather. Even Sam, who had been one of the most resistant to change, seemed to let his guard down, joining in on a game of frisbee and cracking jokes with the others. Ethan watched it all with a sense of satisfaction. This was what he had hoped for, a team that wasn't just co-workers but a group of people who genuinely cared for and supported one another. As the day wound down, Ethan stood to address the group. The staff gathered around, their faces flushed from the sun and laughter. "I just want to say how proud I am of all of you," Ethan began, his voice steady. "This bar has come a long way, and it's because of each and every one of you. You've embraced change, supported each other, and made this place something special." The staff broke into applause, their cheers echoing across the park. Ethan waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "My uncle built that bar to be a place for the community," he said. "And I think we've finally brought that vision back to life. But we're not done yet. This is just the beginning." Another round of applause followed, and Ethan smiled, his heart full. He looked around at the faces of the people who had become his family, and he knew that together they could achieve anything. In the weeks that followed, the sense of camaraderie among the staff continued to grow. The bar thrived, its reputation spreading far beyond the neighborhood. Customers came not just for the drinks but for the welcoming atmosphere and the sense of belonging that had become the bar's hallmark. Lucy, now fully settled into her role as assistant manager, took on more responsibilities, freeing Ethan to focus on other aspects of the business. She proved to be a natural leader, her kindness and work ethic inspiring the rest of the team. One evening, as the bar buzzed with activity, Ethan sat at a corner table, observing the scene. He watched as Lucy greeted customers with her warm smile, as Joe worked behind the counter with a newfound confidence, and as the staff moved seamlessly to keep everything running smoothly. Tom, the regular who had become one of Ethan's biggest supporters, walked over and took a seat across from him. "You've done a hell of a job with this place," Tom said, his tone full of admiration. "Thanks, Tom," Ethan said. "It's been a team effort." Tom nodded, his gaze sweeping over the bustling bar. "Your uncle would be proud." Ethan smiled, the familiar lump rising in his throat. "I hope so." As the night wore on, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about his uncle, about the values he had instilled in him, and about the lessons he had learned along the way. He thought about the challenges he had faced, the people who had doubted him, and the moments when he had wondered if he was in over his head. But more than anything, he thought about the people who had made it all worthwhile. The The staff who had embraced his vision, the customers who had given the bar a second chance, and the community that had welcomed him with open arms. This bar wasn't just a business. It was a legacy, a home, and a testament to the power of perseverance, humility, and the belief that everyone deserves a place to belong. As Ethan stood to make his rounds, greeting customers and chatting with the staff, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The bar was thriving, the people were happy, and the future was bright. And for Ethan Harris, that was more than enough.